This is the moment a neighborhood tyrant, a woman, who declared an innocent golden retriever a nuclear noise threat and tried to get him banned from his own home, finally saw her meticulously crafted life of petty power crumble into dust. You were about to hear the audio evidence from the hidden microphone that did and just expose her hypocrisy. It led to her immediate, devastating resignation, a 6-figure lawsuit, and the public shaming she so richly deserved. You won't believe the meltdown. Stick around. Welcome back to the channel, Neighborhood Watchdogs. If you're here for pure, unadulterated HOA karma and a serving of justice that tastes like victory, you know what to do. Smash that like button until your thumb hurts. Hit subscribe right now. And let's dive into the most outrageous dog dispute this community has ever seen. Our story begins on Primrose Lane, a street that looked like the American dream, all manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. It was actually a simmering pot of resentment thanks to one resident, Patricia Sterling. Patricia, a retired accountant who'd weaponized the HOA bylaws, ruled Primrose with an iron fist and a clipboard. She was the vice president, which in HOA terms means she was the local sheriff, judge, and executioner, all rolled into one crisp linen blazer. Our protagonist is Mark, a young engineer, and his loyal companion, Buster, a 3-year-old golden retriever, whose greatest crime was wagging his tail too hard. The initial conflict was predictably mundane and absurd. It started with a single notice taped to Mark's door threatening a $50 fine for excessive non-human vocalization. The offense. Buster had barked 3 times at a passing delivery truck at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mark, being reasonable, called Patricia. He explained Buster was a well-trained dog, that this was an isolated incident, and he'd ensure it didn't happen again. Patricia's response, delivered with the chilling politeness of a true villain, was, "Mr. Davies, the rules are not suggestions." The decibel level recorded was 78, well above the permitted ambient noise. This is your warning. Mark tried to argue that a leaf blower registered higher, but Patricia simply hung up. Mark thought that was the end of it. He started walking Buster an extra mile, rewarding silence, and generally being hypervigilant. But Patricia wasn't done. She had developed a singular, obsessive focus on Buster. The next week, Mark got 3 more notices. One for a nuisance yelp, when a squirrel ran up a tree. Another for a provocative growl at Mark's neighbor waving hello. The third and most ridiculous was for prolonged distress vocalization, which, translated from Patricia speak, meant Buster was whining once when Mark left for work. The stakes were rising, and Mark realized he wasn't dealing with a neighbor. He was dealing with a zealot. Mark checked the bylaws, and sure enough, there was a vague clause about chronic noise disturbances, but Mark knew this was targeted harassment. He wrote a polite but firm email to the entire HOA board, CCing Patricia, defending Buster, detailing the ridiculous nature of the fines, and requesting a board review. He felt he'd finally taken control, but he was wrong. The next morning, taped to his door was a certified letter from the HOA, signed only by Patricia Sterling. Buster was deemed a habitual noise offender, and was now required to wear a remote-activated vibration-only training collar whenever he was outside. Failure to comply would result in a $1,000 fine and a formal hearing to have Buster removed from the community. Mark stared at the official-looking letter, his blood running cold. They hadn't just rejected his appeal, it escalated to the absolute maximum punishment, and he knew, with a sinking certainty, that Patricia was not going to stop until Buster was gone. Mark was furious. But more than that, he was terrified for his dog. Buster was a member of the family, and Mark wouldn't stand for this bullying. He immediately called the HOA president, an older gentleman named Arthur, who was always more interested in golf than governance. Arthur sounded stressed and told Mark, "Look, Mark, Patricia is very passionate about the noise levels. She provided audio recordings." Mark demanded to hear them. Arthur hesitated, then admitted she only provided the transcripts of the alleged barks, Mark, and she cited the bylaw section she wrote last year. "I'll look into it, but honestly, it's probably easier if you just manage the dog." Mark saw the chilling reality. Patricia wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was writing them, acting as the sole authority, and everyone else was too scared or too lazy to stop her. Mark consulted a lawyer, who advised him the HOA had overstepped their bounds, but that fighting them would be a long, expensive battle of attrition. Mark was sinking fast. The lawyer's advice spurred Mark to action, but not in court, not yet. He had to prove her malice, her intent to harass. He knew Patricia was watching him. He'd catch her staring out her window. He decided to turn the tables. Mark purchased a small, high-quality audio recording device, a tiny, powerful microphone disguised as a harmless patio light, and installed it on his porch, aimed at his own driveway, but sensitive enough to pick up conversations on the sidewalk. He wasn't trying to spy. He was trying to build an alibi for Buster and evidence of harassment. For 3 days, all he got was the gentle humming of traffic and the happy clinking of Buster's water bowl. Then came the explosion. On Thursday morning, Mark was in his home office when he heard a commotion outside. Neighborhood kid Alex was riding his bike on the sidewalk. Buster, who was inside, gave a short, muffled, happy bark, the kind of noise any dog makes. Mark heard Alex stop his bike, and a second later, he heard her voice. The microphone was rolling. "Young man, are you deaf? That dog is a menace. Do you know how much my peace and quiet is worth? I am trying to conduct important neighborhood business here. You need to go home right now. You are provoking that animal." Alex, completely flustered, stammered out, "I was just riding my bike, Mrs. Sterling." And then came the sound Mark was waiting for. A high-pitched, completely unhinged scream. "I said go. Go now. You are disrupting the quiet enjoyment of my property. You little menace. Do you want me to call your parents? I have a decibel meter, and I am telling you, your voice is too loud. Get out of here." The scream wasn't just loud. It was primal, a torrent of pure, concentrated fury, directed at a child for daring to exist near her home. The irony was suffocating. The woman dedicated to silence was screaming bloody murder on the public sidewalk. Mark sat in stunned silence, the recording capturing the kid's hasty retreat, and Patricia's muttered, self-satisfied huffing as she went back inside. But the drama wasn't over. 2 hours later, Mark received an emergency HOA notice. It cited the incident, blaming Buster's bark for causing a disturbance and aggressive behavior in a minor, and stated that due to this clear pattern of escalating threat, the HOA had called an emergency vote. The resolution to be enforced immediately was that Buster must be removed from the property within 48 hours, or the HOA would pursue a court order to seize the dog and place him in a municipal kennel. The notice was final, signed only by Patricia Sterling, who had clearly fabricated the entire event and used her manufactured audio transcripts to manipulate the terrified Arthur and the absent board. Mark looked at the official HOA stamp on the document, then back at the little blinking light on his patio cam, and his stomach dropped out. She had one. Buster had 2 days. Patricia thought she was safe. She thought she had covered her tracks and used the power of the HOA to perform a legal, if morally repugnant, eviction of a family pet. What she didn't know was that her petty tyranny had just been recorded. Mark didn't panic. He went straight to the lawyer with the new evidence. The lawyer listened to the recording, the 3 short, muffled barks from inside Mark's home, followed 2 minutes later by Patricia's ear-splitting, child-terrifying scream, and his jaw dropped. "Mark," the lawyer said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "this isn't just harassment. This is a clear-cut case of abuse of power, defamation, and malicious intent. The decibel level of her own voice in that tantrum is going to be our nuclear weapon." The lawyer immediately filed an emergency injunction in court against the HOA. But Mark knew court was slow. He wanted immediate justice. He did something unconventional. He compiled all the evidence, the 12 ridiculous fines, the mandatory vibration collar notice, the eviction order, and the full, unedited, minute-by-minute audio recording of Patricia's screaming meltdown, and packaged it into a single, devastating email. He sent it to Arthur, the HOA president, every single member of the HOA board, the local paper's watchdog column, and a carefully chosen list of Patricia's closest friends and neighbors. He attached a short, neutral note for your review. "This is the evidence regarding the eviction of my dog, Buster. Please compare the HOA's claim of excessive noise with the actual source of the disturbance." The email landed like a tactical strike. Within hours, Arthur, the president, who had finally seen the full picture of Patricia's derangement, called Mark, sputtering, "Mark, I had no idea." She transcribed her own voice as the dog's bark and edited out the ... The rest? Oh my God. She used her own noise violation to ban your dog. The turning point was instantaneous. Arthur called an emergency, same-day board meeting. Mark's lawyer attended via phone. The board members, horrified by the evidence and terrified of the impending lawsuit and the public shaming from the local paper, took immediate action. The decision was unanimous. The resolution, the eviction notice, was formally rescinded. All fines against Mark were voided, and Patricia Sterling was to be stripped of all HOA power and banned from serving on the board ever again. The final blow came when Arthur, speaking on behalf of the board, called Mark back to deliver the final word. Mark. On a vote of 5-0, the board has accepted Patricia Sterling's immediate forced resignation from the vice presidency, effective immediately. She is no longer associated with this community's governance. Victory was sweet, immediate, and complete. The immediate fallout for Patricia Sterling was swift and humiliating. Mark didn't stop with the board meeting. The local paper, smelling blood and viral content, ran the story the next day with a headline that read, "HOA Vice President Caught Screaming on Audio After Banning Dog for Being Too Loud." They quoted Mark's lawyer, who stated, "We are pursuing action for defamation, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The neighborhood, finally free from her oppressive control, turned on her with a vengeance. The neighbors who had suffered under her petty rules for years began posting their own horror stories on the community's private social media group. One reported how she'd fined them for having the wrong shade of beige mulch. Another revealed she'd tried to ban their teenage daughter from having friends over past 7 p.m. The digital shaming was brutal and total. Patricia, who was obsessed with image and control, became a complete pariah. The true payback, however, came from Mark's lawyer. The lawsuit, demanding a settlement for the financial costs and emotional distress caused by the eviction threat and the attempted forced placement of a training collar on his dog, was significant. The lawyer leveraged the clear evidence of malice, the fabricated minutes, and the audio recording to paint Patricia as a deliberate, harmful actor. Faced with the certainty of losing in court, the HOA's insurance company stepped in to settle. The final payout to Mark was a substantial figure that covered all his legal fees and gave him a substantial cushion. The payback didn't stop at the bank account. The most satisfying part for Mark was the constant, low-level humiliation of watching Patricia suffer the consequences of being utterly exposed. She went from being the neighborhood's feared gatekeeper to its official joke. Neighbors walked their dogs past her house, and if Buster so much as barked a happy hello, they'd stop and wave, letting the sound linger just a moment too long. The final agonizing consequence came when a new HOA bylaw was proposed up. Sterling Rule, stating that any board member who attempts to manipulate documentation or fabricates a complaint will be permanently barred from all community committees and liable for all resulting legal costs. The rule passed unanimously. Patricia Sterling, now completely isolated and despised, couldn't handle the crushing weight of public scorn. She resigned her HOA position in shame, paid a massive settlement, and was now living under the new, ironclad rule designed specifically to prevent her kind of abuse. But Mark had one final move, one last piece of pure, distilled karma that would serve as the final nail in the coffin of her reign. He had realized that the root of her power was her house, the symbol of the perfect, quiet, controlled life she was desperate to protect. Mark's lawyer discovered that the HOA bylaws regarding property sales had a little-known clause. All board-level violations must be disclosed to potential buyers. And Mark, being a good neighbor and now a powerful figure on the newly reformed HOA Appeals Committee, made sure that the Sterling Rule and the full documented history of Patricia's malfeasance, including the 6-figure lawsuit and the forced resignation, were attached to her property disclosure. Patricia put her house on the market, hoping for a quiet, quick exit. But every single potential buyer, upon reading the disclosure addendum that detailed the property's history of documented sustained noise harassment leading to a significant lawsuit, backed out. The stigma was too great. No one wanted to live next to the house where the HOA VP had a nuclear meltdown over a dog bark and then got sued into oblivion. Her perfect, quiet, meticulously maintained home sat on the market for months, becoming a public symbol of her failure. The ultimate quiet revenge came 6 months later. Patricia, unable to sell her house for a reasonable price, finally took a massive loss to an investment group. Mark was there, sipping coffee on his porch as the moving van pulled away. Buster, the noise offender who had been threatened with eviction, sat happily at Mark's feet, occasionally giving a soft, contented sigh. As the truck pulled out of sight, Mark took out his phone and made a final post to the neighborhood group chat, attaching a picture of Buster lounging peacefully in the sun. The Queen of Quiet has officially left the building. Buster says, "Enjoy the silence, everyone." It was a silent, perfect, and completely devastating final victory. Justice, served on a silver platter, had finally been delivered to Primrose Lane. Whoa. Did you hear that scream? That's what happens when a Karen goes up against a hidden microphone. If that story didn't give you chills and a craving for revenge, I don't know what will. You know the drill, folks. Smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next meltdown, and let me know in the comments. What was the most satisfying part of Patricia Sterling's downfall? Was it the lawsuit, the public shaming, or that final devastating blow with the house sale? Let's talk HOA drama.